Part 171. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1701. Seeing it, Man Bao raised his eyebrows and stepped forward, directly reaching out to take Miss Zhao's hand, folding her forefingers slightly, and then placing a little on her tiger's mouth. Dr. Lu breathed a sigh of relief and put the needle on her skin. Seeing her shrinking, she asked with a smile, "Look, does it hurt now?" Seeing that she hadn't plunged in yet, Miss Zhao smiled embarrassedly, shook her head and said, "It doesn't hurt." Dr. Lu smiled and said, "It doesn't hurt. I just said that needles don't hurt." Just as she was saying this, Man Bao raised his palm slightly, just blocking Miss Zhao's line of sight to look at the needle, and Dr. Lu had already stabbed in. Miss Zhao seemed to feel it, and pulled her hand back. But was held by Zhou Man. Man Bao lifted his eyelids and glanced at Miss Zhao. Seeing that she had no response, he withdrew his hand. Miss Zhao's eyes widened instantly when she saw the needle that had been inserted. Man Bao proudly said, "How about it? I said it doesn't hurt, right?" Miss Zhao, who was about to cry, felt it for a moment, and found that it really didn't hurt, so the tears were taken back. Dr. Lu also stabbed it repeatedly. Seeing her frowning slightly, she asked with a smile, "Does it hurt? Or is it sore?" Miss Zhao thought about it and said, "It doesn't hurt, it seems a little sour." In addition, she could feel the process of the needle being pulled out and pierced in. She always felt pain, but when she felt it carefully, it didn't seem to hurt. Dr. Lu secretly exhaled a breath. Man Bao took the opportunity and said, "The other acupuncture points are the same, it won't hurt." Miss Zhao bit her lip and didn't speak, and Ms. Shiza stepped forward to persuade her. After a while, she finally persuaded her to agree to the needle, but her left hand was still holding onto the front of her clothes and refused to let it go. Man Bao watched silently for a while, then turned his head and said to Lu Yunu, "Come and pierce it." Seeing that Ms. Shiza did not object, Lu Yunu immediately became happy. Man Bao beat her up, rolled up his sleeves, grabbed Miss Zhao's legs, and rolled up his pants. Miss Zhao was stunned, a little scared. "What are you doing with the trouser legs?" Seeing that Dr. Lu had pulled out the needle, Man Bao narrowed his eyes at Miss Zhao, and said happily, "Because it was the acupuncture point on the leg." Miss Zhao opened her mouth wide, and with this stunned effort, Dr. Lu had already pierced the needle. Man Bao asked contentedly, "It doesn't hurt, right?" Miss Zhao paused and nodded. So he didn't struggle anymore, and let Dr. Lu tie him. After the needles on her legs were finished, Man Bao pulled out the needles on her tiger's head, and then said, "Sit down, we have to stick 2 needles on your back." Maybe it's because so many needles in her legs don't hurt, so Miss Zhao doesn't resist acupuncture anymore, so she lets her pierce it. Obviously it was a very common needling technique, but both of them sweated a bit on their foreheads when the needles were finished. When Man Bao saw that Dr. Lu had put away the needle bag, he turned his head and asked Ms. Shiza, "Do you need me to have Dr. Lu come over tomorrow?" Ms. Shiza was thinking about opening her mouth. When she heard the words, she immediately said, "Then there will be Imperial Physician Lao Zhou and Dr. Liu's daughter." Man Bao nodded and warned again, "Don't give her supplements." Ms. Shiza responded with a wry smile, who would know that this was caused by eating and drinking. After leaving Zhao Qiagong's mansion, Man Bao said to Lu Yunu, "This is the first outpatient consultation. If it is done, more people will invite you in the future." Man Bao's eyes seemed to flash with starlight. She said, "You are still of the rank of a doctor girl, but since there is already a female imperial doctor of mine in the palace, there will naturally be a second one." Dr. Lu opened her mouth wide in surprise, and pointed at herself at a loss. Me. Man Bao nodded and said, "Wait for the official lectures of the Imperial Physician Office in a few days, and you have to go in and study. You have already studied most of acupuncture. You and Zhenggu can apply for the physical therapy department in the mid-year exam next year, as long as you learn it. Now, in the future, the Taiyuan hospital will recruit people, so you can naturally take the test. She supported Dr. Liu's hand into the car, and said to her, I think the imperial examination is the same as the examiner, and both need to be famous. For example, for me, isn't the reason why I become an imperial physician because of fame. The reputation of a literati comes from his articles, and the reputation of a doctor comes from seeing a doctor. Don't underestimate minor illnesses, and don't be afraid of serious illnesses. Over time, you will naturally have the opportunity to enter the imperial hospital. Dr. Liu's mind was shaken, she clenched her hands, and looked up at Zhou Man after a while. Is what master said true? Man Bao nodded, of course, what did I lie to you for? But it's fine if you don't want to be an imperial physician. It's the same as going to other medical offices. After all, it is too dangerous to be an imperial physician in the palace. No, I think, Lu Yunu's eyes flashed with light, and she said firmly, I want to be an imperial physician. Although it is dangerous to be an imperial physician, the danger has always been with power and interests. Her grandfather was an imperial physician, and she clearly knew that the current prosperity and wealth of the Lu family were all tied to her grandfather. She was sent to the palace very early to be a doctor girl. She has seen too many ups and downs. Although her goal is clear, she has always been a little afraid that the sky will not turn out. Her father is a concubine, and because she entered the palace because she was too young, her relationship with her brothers and sisters at home was very general, and even her relationship with her parents was not very deep. She is not sure that she can really find a suitable husband to marry after leaving the palace, but now the road that master has shown her is even broader. Dr. Lu straightened her back and said earnestly, I want to be an imperial physician. Man Bao nodded, then let's do it. If it weren't for the fact that she had a job field to be an imperial physician, she didn't really want to be a doctor. She originally wanted to read the medical books in the Chongquen Museum. After the imperial physician office was established, she would resign. But Chita. Man Bao turned his head to Lu Yunu and said, you will be able to divide the fields at that time. Dr. Lu didn't care much about the job field, but she thought of another thing, I'll be a courtier then, and my family will never give me to others at will, right? Man Bao blinked, Dr. Lu is a very nice person, he wouldn't have given you any chance, right? Dr. Lu smiled at Man Bao, and there were a lot of Lu family members. I'm afraid her grandfather would not take care of these trivial matters, and she had parents, grandmothers, and several aunts and uncles on top of her. Man Bao obviously couldn't understand the complicated situation, and Dr. Lu didn't say anything. They went all the way back to the palace, and Man Bao went with her to the side hall of the East Palace to watch the other two disciples get needles. As soon as the doorkeeper saw Imperial Dr. Zhou coming in person, he immediately gave another person a wink, and that person ran away. After a while, Eunuch Wu ran from behind to rub the needle. He held his waist and pointed at Zhou Man, who was pointing at her two apprentices. Lord Zhou Xiao, my waist has been uncomfortable these 2 days, can you show me? Man Bao rolled up his sleeves and let him enter the curtain on the other side, and said while checking him, Eunuch Wu, next time you want to get an injection, just call me at the back, why wait for me to come in front? Oh, that can't be done, it's a rule. Eunuch Wu didn't hide that he came to rub the needle on purpose, and smiled, this is in the side hall, that's a set rule, but if it's behind, let people know now, what kind of ugly words can be spread out. Eunuch Wu's voice was barely audible, but Man Bao, who really checked his waist, still heard it. There are a lot of things going on in the palace, and Lord Zhou Xiao still doesn't know about it. See you tomorrow. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1702. The Imperial Physician's Office is about to start school. In the future, At least for a short time. Zhenggu and the others can no longer go to the palace to puncture needles. The news in the palace has always been well informed. Perhaps because of this, the number of palace people who have applied for acupuncture in the past 2 days has increased. As one of the principals, Eunuch Wu received more news. For example, I heard that King Gong quietly got up at night and went to the small kitchen to feel the food. When someone in the palace saw it, he didn't dare to say a word. Find a way to hide it from Aunt Shang. For another example, several adults feel that the education fee set by the Imperial Physician's office is too high, and they are letting Mr. Wang from the censor's desk impeach the prince, and the Imperial Physician's hospital is taking the opportunity to make money. Man Bao listened to the gossip with relish at first, but she didn't expect that the gossip would burn to her side, and she immediately asked, "Which Lord Wang? Is it Wang Ji?" Eunuch Wu, who was laying on the bed for acupuncture, smiled and replied yes. He has been here for 3 days and Zhou Man will leave the palace tomorrow, which is really a pity. He lay on the bed and said indifferently, "Lord Zhou Xiao, don't worry, His Highness is often impeached, and nothing will happen." Who is worried about the prince? She is worried that the Xiao Yuan is not good. She must know that she is standing behind Xiao Wenzen. Well, there are also all the doctors in the hospital. Man Bao put the last needle in, leaving her 3 disciples alone, and propped her chin aside and asked, "Eunuch Wu, do you know who those adults are?" Eunuch Wu felt a little sleepy, and asked, "Why do you ask this? Leave these things to the Zhan Shifu. There are people in the court who speak for the prince. Does anyone speak for their hospital?" Man Bao frowned, but she still asked. She decided to write down the names of these people, turn back to tell Xiao Yuan Zheng, and directly reject their family. "Humph, since it's too expensive, then don't come. She hasn't impeached them for trying to dig the corner of the emperor." Thinking of this, Man Bao's eyes lit up. That's right, imperial physicians don't have the power to fold up, but they do. Man Bao looked at Eunuch Wu, who was lying on his stomach. If it weren't for the needle sticking in his body, she would definitely pat him on the shoulder twice to express her happiness. When she returned to the Chongquen Museum, she found that Xiao Yuan was not there, so she turned and ran to the Tai hospital to find him. Xiao Yuan Zhen was burying his head in writing, and when he saw a person standing in front of him, he raised his head and glanced at it. Seeing it was Zhou Man, he asked, "What's the matter?" "Xiao Yuan Zhen, does anyone want those 20 places?" Naturally, the Queen Mother gave them 3 days to report. "Promise, I will report 36 at a time. I'm having a headache how to choose this person." Man Bao took the list and looked at it. Seeing a lot of repeated surnames on it, he asked, "Isn't this from one family?" "One family, not one family." Man Bao found a name. The head of the household marked on the back was Wang Ji, and she also found the names of the adults. She smiled and drew a circle on it with a pen under Xiao Yuanzhen's eyes. "Xiao Yuanzhen, since it's embarrassing, let these 5 people go." Xiao Yuanzhen glanced at it and asked, "Have they offended you?" He said earnestly, "Emperor Zhou, we cannot avenge our personal revenge as officials. I have already discussed with the other imperial physicians in the hospital. First, make sure that there is only one person from the first clan, and the rest will be divided after consideration. In fact, the number of places is it's almost divided." Man Bao said, "They and His Majesty have impeached you, don't you know?" It was just that Xiao Yuan Zhen, who was being impeached, paused and stared slightly. "Who did you listen to?" Eunuch Wu's name almost blurted out, and Man Bao immediately turned around and said, "I just heard it anyway. If you don't believe me, go to the censor's desk and ask." Of course, Xiao Yuanzhen couldn't ask for it himself, that would be a waste, and it would be too shocking. So he called a subordinate and asked him to inquire. The censor terrace is also in the imperial city, and it's not far away, so it takes a long walk to get there. Sitting aside, Man Bao helped organize various checklist documents while talking to Xiao Yuanzheng. Someone is impeached, do you have to argue? Xiao Yuanzheng said with a headache, what is the debate, and how can I not think about it with the censor? Man Bao felt that they couldn't admit it, otherwise, the Yashitai will still treat us as easy to bully in the future, and bully us for anything. Xiao Yuanzheng looked at her and said, did you submit a plea case last time? Didn't you also submit a plea case in person? Said that Zhou Man was late. Man Bao said without raising his head, what's the matter? I was late that time. It was indeed a mistake, but this time we were right. She said, 100 taels for one person, and only 2,000 taels for 20 people a year. Where does the money come from? Man Bao, who often earns money from nobles in the capital, knows that these powerful families are not short of money. An institution is 2,000 taels a year, where is there more? But the account is obviously not calculated like this. The little imperial doctor who came back from inquiring about the news bowed his head and stood in front of Xiao Yuan, saying, the annual salary of a fourth-rank official is 50 taels, and 100 taels this year is equivalent to 1/4 rank an official's salary for 2 years. A fourth-rank official must spend 10 years without food or drink to cultivate a doctor. What is this not collecting money? The little imperial doctor secretly raised his head and glanced at Xiao Yuanzheng, whose face was ashen, his voice was a little lower, and he continued to bite the bullet. Those censors also said that the good academies outside only have about 20 or 2 beam repairs a year. Not to mention ordinary small academies, which can be studied in 5 or 8 taels for a year. This study of medical skills is actually 10 times more expensive than studying the strategy of governing the country. Is it possible that medical craftsmen are more than scholars? Xiao Yuanzhen's face could hardly be seen, and even the other busy imperial physicians in the imperial hospital put down their work and stood up and listened carefully. Man Bao was stunned. She knew that the censor's words were not very pleasant, but she didn't expect it to sound like this. She slapped the table in anger, turned her head to Xiao Yuanzheng and said, Yuanzheng, do we still have to endure this tone? The fold must go up. The other imperial physicians couldn't hold back the fire in their chests and nodded vaguely. Xiao Yuanzheng, who was so angry that he almost lost his mind, turned his head and saw Zhou Man's stirring appearance, and calmed down. He glared at her, turned back and asked the little imperial doctor, what else? The little imperial doctor said in a cold sweat, also, he scolded His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, and finally said that the Imperial Hospital has been getting close to the East Palace recently. Could it be that he is making money in the East Palace under the guise of art? The Imperial Hospital was quiet for a while. Xiao Yuan was contemplating, but Man Bao rolled his eyes and said, are they fools? His Majesty handed over the matter of the Imperial Physician's office to the Crown Prince, and our Imperial Physician will revise books and discuss the construction of the Imperial Physician's office. If you want to do it in the Chongquen Museum, you will inevitably have to communicate with the Zhan Shifu, and if you don't go hard with the East Palace, do you want to visit their censor's desk? Physicians. Xiao Yuanzheng turned his head unbearably and said to her, you can shut up, how can the palace be so open-mouthed? See you at 7 o'clock in the afternoon, I have something to do temporarily, so I changed the time. It's not that you read it wrong. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1703. Man Bao shut up, but was about to start writing. She rolled up her sleeves and said, Xiao Yuanzheng, you argue, and I'll give them a bullet. Humph, who can't scold someone? Xiao Yuanzheng, who was organizing a language to appease his subordinates, paused for a while and asked, how can you make a discount? The imperial physicians in the Taiyuan hospital generally do not have the right to make a discount. In the entire Taiyuan hospital, there are only 2 deputy hospital envoys except for the main hospital. But at present, the 2 vice presidents of Taiyuan hospital are vacant, so only Xiao Yuanzheng has the right. It's just that Xiao Yuanzheng has never been involved in matters other than the imperial hospital, and rarely submits discounts. Every time he submits discounts, it is because the household department deducts the money for medicines. Man Bao said, I'm still compiled by Chongqing Museum, why can't I go on? That's right, Zhou Man is still compiled by the 5th grade, wait a minute, Xiao Yuanzheng just now feels that something is wrong. He and Lu Imperial Physician and others did not make less efforts in editing the book, and they did not even do less than Zhou Man. Why are they single jobs and only get a salary, but Zhou Man was appointed as a 6th grade imperial doctor, and was awarded a 5th grade editor. After Zhou Man had been an official for almost half a year, Xiao Yuanzheng finally realized that something was wrong. Seeing that Xiao Yuanzheng's eyes were a little strange, Man Bao fell back and asked with a puzzled wink, Xiao Yuanzheng, what's wrong with you, are you dumbfounded? Xiao Yuanzheng glanced at her, and secretly said, is he just dumbfounded? But this is not the time to say this. He turned his head to look at the others, and sighed, everyone, let's go to work, the province has not sent me the book, so the matter is still inconclusive, and it is not urgent. And it is said that I am impeached, and the main thing is to impeach His Royal Highness. You don't have to worry. Man Bao was stunned and said dissatisfiedly, Yuanzheng, how can you be so cowardly? Xiao Yuanzheng couldn't help it, raised his hand and patted her head, and said, you can shut up, it's an adult's business, don't get involved. Man Bao touched the patted head and said, I've already decided, I'll write out the impeachment book and hand it up today, Xiao Yuan was just trying to persuade her, and after thinking about it, she was writing the book in the capacity of the editor of Kongwengan, then her superiors are Yang Heshu and Kong Jiju, what does it have to do with him? So shut up again. Man Bao picked up the list on the table and copied it, and handed over the usual work to other imperial physicians before leaving. Stop, Xiao Yuan was calling her, but he still couldn't hold back the exhortation, the people in the censor's desk are all powerful, so don't make a fuss when you fold up. I'm not afraid, Man Bao said, the chief of the censor's desk is the old Tang, and the old Tang is very reasonable. Then he ran away. Imperial physician Lu couldn't help but worry when he saw it, the hospital is right, don't you stop me? Imperial physician Zhou is so young after all, so his words are not serious. Xiao Yuanzheng said indifferently, you also said that she is young, His Majesty and other courtiers are watching, and they won't take it too seriously. After a pause, he picked up the list that was circled by Man Bao, and said, by the way, these people who have been circled are gone, let's see how many people are left before choosing. Imperial physician Lu, what about the injustice and personal revenge? However, Imperial physician Lu still took it over, removed those people, circled the overlapping ones, and copied them on another piece of paper, so it was easy to choose. For example, Wang's, there are 3 registered places, Wang Ji is only one of them, and the other 2 are arranged side by side. It is much more convenient to list them in this way, and then they can choose at a glance. Man Bao excitedly ran back to Chongqing Museum, and brought a pot of boiling water for himself that had just been boiled. She poured out a cup and began to grind ink. When the ink was almost polished and the water was warm, she drank it all in one go, poured another glass and set it aside, then sat down, spread out a piece of white paper, took a deep breath and selected it from the pen holder. A pen came, exhaled, and when the ink got in, his eyes brightened and he began to write with great interest. Other editors who were half a room away from her noticed and couldn't help but paced forward and asked with a smile, Lord Zhou Xiao, why are you so happy? Man Bao said without raising his head, it's nothing. After thinking about it, she thought it was wrong. She raised her head and denied it with a serious face, I'm not happy, I'm angry and sad now. The editor looked suspiciously at her shining eyes that could not be concealed even if she tried her best to keep her face straight, and thought to herself, is this a sign of anger and sadness? Man Bao has lowered his head again. She wanted to scold some people in the censor's desk for a long time, but it was indeed her fault that she was impeached last time. She privately felt that it was not wrong for them to arrest them for being late, but it was too much to implicate the prince and others innocently. Especially when they implicate people everywhere like this, not to prevent such things from happening again, but for personal gain. So even though she later admitted the punishment, she was actually very unconvinced. She has been holding back some words in her heart, and Bai Shan also said that the timing was not right, that it was just arrogance and shirk responsibility. Why would arguing with them leave such an impression on people? The husband also let her relax and wait for the future. She thought it would take a long time to wait for this future, but she did not expect to have to wait for only a few months. She felt that in 2 months she would forget this hatred. Sure enough, Lord Tianzun is kind to her, ha 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 ha. The more Man Bao wrote, the more excited he became. He didn't know when it was time to eat, or Bai Shan was waiting for her on the left and right in the cafeteria, so she said to Suyu, who was waiting by the side, "You put the food box. Leave it here, I'll give it to her later." Suyu had long since become accustomed to it, so he stepped back after salute. Bai Shan put down his chopsticks and said to Bai Erlang, "Help us watch, I'll find her." Bai Erlang didn't lift his head while eating, just nodded slightly. Bai Shan found Changguan Hall, and there was only Man Bao in the library. Bai Shan pushed open the door and went in, but she didn't respond when he walked to her side, so he couldn't help but curiously probe to see what she was writing. After watching it for a while, he finally couldn't help but say, "Are you going to fight with the censor?" Man Bao was startled, looked up and saw Bai Shan exhaling. "Why are you walking without a sound?" "When we got off school, we ran past the library and saw that the doors and windows were closed. We thought there was no one there, but you were still in the house." Bai Shan pointed at the hourglass and explained that he was here. "The reason for this, I have eaten now, aren't you hungry?" It was only then that Man Bao felt hungry. Don't say it, it was fine when he didn't pay attention. When he paid attention, he felt very hungry. When he looked at the paper in front of him, he couldn't write a single word. Bai Shan smiled and said, "Let's go have lunch first, and come back and write when you're done." Man Bao was about to use a weighting stone to press the paper, when he suddenly thought of something, glanced at a few tables not far away, and simply folded it and stuffed it into his arms. Bai Shan raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "Yes, I've been a lot more cautious." Man Bao said, "This is called carefulness." I'm back. Next update is around 9 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1704. After eating, the two did not return to the Changguan Museum, but put the pen, ink, paper and inkstone in a basket, and went to the observation building outside while holding back their sleepiness. The others glanced at the two of them, walked around the yard twice before going back to take a nap, ignoring them. Humph, when they become officials, they must add a piece of advice to the imperial court that unmarried couples cannot study or work in the same department. Not even a couple. Bai Shan followed Man Bao upstairs with a pot of water and 2 cups. The two found a seat in the attic and sat down. Chi couldn't help yawning. There is no other way, only to have enough food, and it is the cold winter season, especially easy to get sleepy. The two sat side by side at the table, staring blankly at the green hills and the palace outside the attic. The cold wind was blowing, but it couldn't blow away their drowsiness. Bai Shan shook his head, and after finding that it was of little use, he said, "Forget it, it's hard to wake up with a blow dryer. Show me the book and let's talk." Man Bao took it out of his arms and gave it to him, looking like 4 or 5 pieces. Bai Shan said while unfolding, so many, are you going to write a long essay? Man Bao yawned, and a tear came out of the corner of her eyes. She said sleepily, I've written almost, and I can write 2 pages at most. That's not a lot, most of the excerpts are concise and concise. Who always writes so long like her? Bai Shan glanced at every line and asked casually, what is this time for? Soon, without waiting for Man Bao to speak, he knew why, because she started the chapter with a question. She told the emperor that she just finished sorting out the list early this morning, and before she could turn it in, she was shocked to hear the news of the impeachment of the prince and Xiao Yuanzheng on the censor's desk. Bai Shan doubted, you really made the list first, and then heard the news? Didn't you go to the front hall to see your 3 apprentices get needles this morning after reading the book with me? He said, I haven't heard about the impeachment by the censor. Did you hear it from those chamberlains and palace maids? Man Bao looked around and said in a low voice, change the order. It's all right if things haven't changed. Otherwise, it seems that I'm very stingy. Bai Shan was non-committal, as long as he knew what was going on in his heart. Bai Shan read it quickly, woke up, and was no longer drowsy. He pressed down the sheets of paper in his hand and said, you can't write like this. Man Bao tilted his head, where am I bad at writing? Is it because the allusions are not used well, or is the scolding not thorough enough? The allusions are used well, and the scolding is good, but you scolded the wrong person. Bai Shan looked her up and down and asked, you are alone, and are you going to fight the entire censor station? He said, don't blame me for not reminding you. Although old Master Tang is not as scolding as Master Wei, it is not much worse. Think about Swexian Tang's mouth. When Man Bao heard this, he was startled and said, I didn't scold Mr. Tang. Bai Shan clicked the words on the paper and said, Yashi Tai is in charge of Mr. Tang, and you bluntly said, the censor is for personal gain and does not care about the people's livelihood and the country's plans. This is to scold the censors of the entire censor station. Master Tang is definitely not happy in his heart. He understands this matter, and he will never let you scold you like that, and you will definitely meet at that time. Bai Shan shook his head and said, old Master Tang has the entire censor's desk behind him, not to mention those officials who are not used to the prince or who want to go to the imperial physician's office, but can't you beat them? It's not that I despise your imperial hospital, but that the imperial doctor of your imperial hospital has never been good at quarreling, right? Not to mention that only you and Xiao Yuan in the entire imperial hospital can make a discount. Man Bao said with a serious face, who said I was discounted on behalf of Tai Tai Hospital, I was discounted as an editor, I just can't stand their corpse and vegetarian meals, not only can't serve the country and the people, but also come to dig the foundation of the country and your majesty, and you still dislike that the country and your majesty have not given enough, it is simply outrageous. Bai Shan raised his eyebrows slightly. Man Bao continued with a stern face, my Shangguan is Yang Shui, Mr. Yang. Further up is Kong Jiju. Humph, fights, who is afraid of who? Let's not say that there are so many editors in Chongquen Museum, Kong Jiju still has a Kuazijian in his hands. We are all literati, come together. Bai Shan understood and asked with a smile, did you think about it earlier, or did you think about it now? Of course I thought of it now. Man Bao pulled at the paper he was holding, and knew that if she wrote the book as an editor, then some of her sentences would have to be changed, otherwise people would know her at a glance. It's selling dog meat on a sheep's head. Man Bao sighed, the hospital is too small to have the right to participate in politics. As a result, she had to temporarily borrow strength from Yang Heshu and Kong Jiju, and she didn't know whether those 2 adults would join in and let her borrow strength. Bai Shan took out the pen and ink from the basket and said, don't worry, Kong Jiju always protects your shortcoming. As long as someone in the court can't help but bring up Chongquen Pavilion, then Kong Jiju will definitely protect you. He poured some water into the inkstone, and while grinding the ink, he smiled and said, "But we can't wait for people to talk about it, so you have to make a lot of changes. It is better to make more enemies than to make fewer enemies. You can scold whoever has the idea, don't rip the entire sensor station into the water." He said meaningfully, although the sensor terrace is headed by the old Tang, the people in it may not all listen to the old Tang. The last time Daming Palace officials fought and Wang Ji impeached the East Palace, the old Tang did not listen. Appear. Man Bao immediately understood, bit the pen and said, "One Wang Ji is not enough. Didn't you also hear the names of the 4 adults?" "But that's just rumors," she looked around and said in a low voice, "Eunuch Wu told me, there is no evidence, and I don't know if they followed Wang Ji to the book." Bai Shan said indifferently, "What are you afraid of? Write it down, although you are not a censor, but you are young, and being young also has the advantage of being young. Listening to the wind is rain, and no one will blame you. If you wrong them, they can express themselves in a letter. The court is different from other places, they have written in black and white. Will everyone still press their heads to recognize that they are not doing it?" Man Bao actually felt that what Bai Shan said made sense. She turned her head to look at him and asked, "When did your heart bend so much?" Hearing this, Bai Shan raised his hand and tapped her on the head, smiling, "It's been so long since we've been in the palace, and it's not like you who only think about cultivating books and studying medicine every day. It's not hard to figure out how to learn how to be a human being and an official with a doctoral degree, and you will understand when you stand at the Zhan Shifu and listen to their reports on political affairs. Good night, more tomorrow." Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1705. Man Bao's eyes brightened. "Do you still teach the way of being an official? I want to learn it too. Why isn't it on the class schedule you gave me?" "Which waiter taught the class?" "I'm going to take it too." Zhou Man was recruited to live in the palace. Yang Hesha said at the beginning that if she wanted to take a class, she could go to listen to it. After all, when Chang Guanhao recruited talents, her name was on the list of talents, although she did not come in as a student, but to be an official. However, Zhou Man was very busy after entering the palace. After a few months, he attended no more than 5 classes in total. 2 of them were to support their husband, and the other 3 were because the content of the class happened to be of interest to her. So I ran and listened. Bai Shan glanced at her and said, "Of course it's not the way to be an official. Sometimes the lecturers will discuss what happened in the court with us, as well as those disputes in the previous court. There is a lot of discussion. Now, knowing what the adults in the previous dynasty and the adults in the court did, I slowly figured it out." He said, "And there's Mr. There are some things that cannot be said in class. It is boring to say it thoroughly, and it is easy to get into trouble. But Bai Shan and Bai Cheng are the direct disciples of Mr. Zhuang, so naturally they are different. He is also a waiter in the palace now, but it is convenient for him to open a small stove for them." Every day, the 3 teachers and apprentices talked, answered some questions in the classroom, and pointed out what the other lecturers had not said, and Bai Shan also learned. To put it bluntly, when you are an official in the court, this can last for a long time, but when you are in charge of your government, you can live up to the salary you get. This is what Bai Shan summed up as an official after listening to the lectures of various gentlemen. He said to Man Bao, "Just ask me what you want to know, otherwise if you want to figure it out, I'm afraid you won't be able to miss a class." When Man Bao heard this, he was discouraged. "Okay, you can show me your notes, or just talk to me every day when you have a meal break. I'm so busy right now that I don't have time at all." Bai Shan nodded, "I see." He clicked on the polished ink, put down the ink stick and said, "Write it." Man Bao thought for a while, and after half an hour he dipped in ink and started writing. Bai Shan sat and watched, giving her pointers from time to time. asking her to change her sentence or write it from the other side. Because it has been written once, and this time I discussed it with Bai Shanxian, so it is quite smooth. Man Bao finished writing in one breath. Seeing that it was almost time for class in the afternoon, Bai Shan took over the manuscript she had written and quickly went through it again, then nodded and said, "Just do it again, I'm off to class." Man Bao waved his hand, "Go, go." Bai Shan ran to class, and Man Bao smiled with the manuscript he had written, read it through and revised a few sentences, then dried the ink, put the things away, and happily ran back to the Chongquen Museum. Man Bao found a brand new book in his place, pondered it for a while, and cleared his throat, then opened the book and copied the manuscript. To be the best. She felt that she was not so serious in her exams. Transcription was slower than writing, and when she finally finished transcribing, her neck was sore. She raised her head and turned her sour neck. When the ink was dry, she put away the book and sent it to the door to save it. Humph, quarrel, who is afraid of who? It's a pity, I will be off tomorrow, and it's about to leave the office now. It will take 2 days for the provincial government to accept it, right? For the first time, I was not so eager to take a break. Man Bao sent Jizi to the province under the door, and then walked back to the East Palace with his hands behind his back. It happened that the prince had finished dealing with things in the Taiji Hall and was about to return to the East Palace. Seeing the man in front walking with his hands behind his back and walking domineering and comfortable from a distance, the prince couldn't help but turn his head and ask Eunuch Wu, "What's the joy of this?" Eunuch Wu thought hard for a long time but couldn't come up with it, so he thoughtfully said, "Because the Imperial Physician Office is about to start school." The Imperial Physician's Office started school, and when she met Zhou Man's class, she would definitely go to class, so she would have a lot of time to go in and out of Miyagi. It's always more fun outside than in the palace. Eunuch Wu thought about it for a long time and only wanted to remember this one, and then it was gone. The prince glanced at him and walked towards Zhou Man with his hands behind his back. The people in front of him didn't notice it, mainly because the two sides were far away. Seeing that she had entered the East Palace, the prince still had his hands behind his back, and looked from side to side at the scenery on both sides. He couldn't help but look left and right. After a while, he realized that it was as if the East Palace belonged to her. The prince simply shouted out of luck, "Zhou Man." Man Bao was enjoying the scenery on both sides, and he was startled when he heard the scream. He immediately retracted the hand behind his back and turned around to look, and saw that the prince was standing far away. Man Bao stopped, wanting to wait for him to come up, but seeing that the other party didn't move, she felt that something was wrong, as if she was a subordinate, although he wanted to go to her side, but she still had to go to him. Man Bao was tired, but with a smile on his face, he trotted forward with a happy face. After running for a while, he ran to the prince, and saluted a little out of breath, "I have seen His Royal Highness." The prince said, "In the palace, what is the manner of running and jumping?" Man Bao, "If she walks slowly, will she become disrespectful to the crown prince?" However, the prince was used to training his younger brothers and sisters. He gave a casual lesson. When he saw someone approaching him, he continued to go to the East Palace and asked, "Are you going to the Taiji Palace to see Prince Gong?" "No, now His Royal Highness Prince Gong doesn't have to watch it every day. I'll take a look when I'm free." "I'm not going today, I'm going to save it." Although Zhou Man said it lightly, the crown prince knew that she was not careless. Even if Prince Gong didn't need her to look after him frequently, she would go there every 2 days at most. If she didn't go, she would even send a special letter to the queen to ask for leave. The crown prince once saw her leave request form from the queen mother. The prince asked, "What are you doing in Mengxia province?" Man Bao talked about the impeachment of Wang Ji and others about the prince and the imperial hospital for accumulating money. Seeing the prince's indifference, he asked, "Your Highness, aren't you angry?" "Oh, such a trivial matter is not worth being angry with," he said. "The father and the courtiers are not stupid, they are only 2,000 taels a year, not 20,000 taels, 200,000 taels, they need to be greedy. Any money." Eunuch Wu, who was behind him, replied, "That's right, His Highness took out a bunch of pearls at random. A few pieces of jade are worth so much money, so why go greedy for that little money? It's just that they can't get used to His Highness on a daily basis, so it's just impeachment. As long as it does not directly point to the shortcomings of the prince, nor does it imply that he has no children or anything, and the number of participants is not enough, the prince will generally not explode. Every day someone impeached him, and if he was furious every time, he would just be angry all the time every day." Next update around 4 p.m. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1706. Man Bao glanced at the prince sympathetically, the prince frowned, glanced at her condescendingly, and asked, "So what are you doing in the book?" "I have written a letter to impeach Wang Ji and others." The prince raised his eyebrows slightly, looked Zhou Man up and down and asked, "Are you arguing with the censor?" Man Bao said solemnly, "His Royal Highness, how can it be a quarrel? I am here to make the court, the imperial physician's office and the country better." The prince nodded perfunctorily, "Yes, the impeachment is good, but don't cry if you can't make a noise." "Am I that kind of person?" Man Bao said ambitiously with his chest out, "as long as I'm reasonable, I won't lose." The prince twitched the corners of his mouth and felt that she was too naive. In this world, especially in this court, winning or losing is never justified. After the prince glanced at her, he backed his hands and quickened his pace, surpassing Zhou Man to the backyard where he lived. Eunuch Wu hurriedly trotted to keep up, but was grabbed by Man Bao, who was left behind, and asked in a low voice, "Your Highness, what does this mean?" Eunuch Wu whispered, "It just means you can play by yourself." After all, he immediately broke free from Zhou Man's hand, trotted to catch up with the prince, and followed behind 3 steps behind. Man Bao scratched his head and couldn't help muttering, "I originally wanted to play by myself, but you stopped me." She shrugged and turned to go to Chongguan Museum. When she walked to Chongguan Hall, it happened that Bai Shan and the others were going to school. Man Bao thought of something, and immediately trotted to find Mr. Zhuang. Mr. Zhuang was taking the manuscript he copied down and was going home. When he saw Man Bao running in, he asked with a smile, "What are you running for?" Man Bao said, "Sir, go back and tell my sister-in-law that tomorrow morning I want to eat mutton and bamboo shoots noodles." Mr. Zhuang asked, "Didn't you leave the palace after breakfast tomorrow morning?" "I can eat a little less and go back to eat sangza noodles with my stomach." Mr. Zhuang raised his hand and tapped her on the head, and responded. At this time, Mr. Zhuang didn't know that Man Bao Shangjizi had quarreled with someone, so he answered with a smile. It should be said that at this time most of the courtiers, including the censor station, did not know. It is too late to hand over the book to the office. Everyone has to prepare for the office. Some irrelevant book is piled there, and the person on duty will choose it, and then decide whether to send it to the Zongsha department and His Majesty for reference. Zhou Man was a 5th grade editor, and impeaching Wang Ji and others was not the most important thing, so he was left behind with a bunch of essays. Wei Ji, who was on duty at night, was bored, and asked people to categorize these papers, and tomorrow they would send some important ones to the palace for the emperor's approval. Yes, most of the officials, especially the lower-level officials, can take a rest, but the upper-level officials have the rules of rotation. Not to mention the emperor, when he met the official Xiu Mu, he avoided the morning court in the morning, and he only lost some discounts, but he still had to work every day. Zhou Man's papers were also screened out, and Wei Ji happened to read the recent impeachment papers. The articles of impeachment have always been an important thing to supervise the morals of the officials. From these articles, you can know which official went to Hualu to get drunk, or which official or official's son did something that corrupted customs or violated the law. Wei Ji has always believed that whether the official governance is clear and bright depends on whether the impeachment book can be impeached at will. When one day when an official speaking does not dare to say anything, it means that the administration of officials has been corrupted to a certain extent. Therefore, even among the censors, there is a phenomenon of impeachment for personal gain, but he still does not advocate the prohibition of His Majesty. Because people tend to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, once the speaker is punished without evidence, it will be a great blow to the opening of the path of speech. After turning over several books, most of the books he turned over are placed on the right-hand side. This does not require the emperor to deal with it, and can only be handed over to the Zhongsha department. There is only one book on the left-hand side, which requires the emperor to personally watch. He picked up a book at random, opened it, and saw the densely packed words, and it hurt first. Although it looked neat, there were so many words. How many times have I said it, even the impeachment should be concise and to the point, less nonsense, those people in the censor's desk just don't understand, huh? Wei Ji was a little more awake, sat up slightly, turned around and read from the first line. It took Wei Ji a while to finish reading the booklet, and after thinking about it, he still stretched out his hand and put it on the left. The excerpts screened by Mengxia province were sent to the emperor's case early the next morning. But the emperor didn't want to be diligent this morning, so after breakfast, he and his daughters played in the imperial garden for a long time. When he was almost happy, he went back to reviewing the excerpts that he could never finish. When the emperor saw Zhou Manzhang's book, he couldn't help but patted the table happily. He took the book and laughed, and said to Guzhong, "This child is not bad," she scolded wonderfully, "why didn't I know she still has this eloquence?" Guzhong smiled and poured tea for the emperor, and asked casually, "Which little lord is your majesty talking about?" "It's Zhou Man. Yesterday, Wang Ji wrote a letter to impeach the prince and the imperial hospital. Today, she will write to impeach Wang Ji." The emperor shook his head and smiled. "I don't know if she is venting her anger on behalf of the prince or the imperial hospital." The emperor hadn't finished it yet, he only watched half of it. He smiled and took a sip of tea, and continued to look down. Looking at it, the smile on the emperor's face was gone. Guzhong stood by and looked terrified, but dared not show it. The emperor reached out and knocked on the table, and after a while, he smiled and said, "I underestimated her and sent this book to Kongji Wine House. After all, she was able to go up because she is a member of the Chongguan Pavilion. Wupanziozwan, Kong Jiju is the owner of the pavilion, and he should take care of it." Guzhong didn't know what was written on the book, and he didn't dare to spy on it. He bent down and stretched out his hand to take the book, and then put it in a box and asked his apprentice to send it out of the palace. Kong sacrificed wine for a rare rest. He was drinking with friends at home and playing chess on the way to cultivate himself. After receiving the document from the palace, he curiously opened it. The Duke of Yuxian, who was playing chess with him, saw that he had not spoken for a long time, so he raised his eyelids to look at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Kong Jiju stroked his beard and said with a relieved smile, "It's nothing, a subordinate official has just impeached a few officials." "What's the big deal? Your Majesty even handed you the book." Kong Jiju smiled, put the book back in the box, and said indifferently, "It's not a big deal, Mr. County, it's my turn to go now, right?" The Duke of Yu County didn't ask any further questions, but replied with a smile. After the game of chess was over, he said goodbye with his hands behind his back and went home. After Yu Xiangong left, Kong Jiju reopened the box and glanced at the book. After a while, he turned back to the study and said to the servant, "Go and invite Zhao Qiuagong and Guo Zhan to come over." Zhao Qiuagong is the uncle of the country and has always had a good relationship with the crown prince, not to mention Guo Zhenji, he is the head of the Zhenji mansion. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1707. The two old men were invited to the Confucius mansion to read an excerpt, and Guo Zhan boasted, "It's well written, but the impeachment of Wang Ji is not a big deal." Because he stabbed his nephew, his reputation in the court was not good. "What's the matter? These 20 places in the imperial physician's office can only earn 2,000 taels of silver, so I'm not afraid of him suing. I'll just ask the officials of the Zhan Shifu to submit a statement, and I don't need to worry about Kong Jiju." Kong Jiju raised his eyelids and glanced at him. "Didn't you read the signature on the back?" Guo Zhenji nodded and said, "I saw it. It was because I saw it that I felt it was unnecessary." He said, "Although Zhou Man belongs to His Highness, he is also favored in front of His Majesty and the Empress. A good knife should be used on the blade. There is no need to involve her in such trivial matters." Kong Jiju immediately had a feeling that summer insects can't speak ice. At this moment, he really felt sorry for Zhou Man. Although Zhou Man didn't say it clearly, Kong Jiju went in and out of Chongguan Pavilion every day, and he heard her and Xiao Yuanzhen's whispers. He could see that Zhou Man was not the prince's person, and probably not the emperor and the queen. "The child is still young and has a big heart, so I'm afraid she doesn't take the people in the palace to heart. You know, she has repeatedly refused to enter the palace to be an imperial physician. A group of people only saw that she got along well with the prince, and they thought she was the prince." Kong Jiju shook his head slightly and said, "Jizi has been delivered to the province and handed over to His Majesty, and His Majesty specially sent it to me." Guo Zhan was silent for a while, and after a while, he asked, "What's Your Majesty's intention?" Zhao Qiuagong knew the emperor better, and after pondering for a while, he asked, "Is Your Majesty trying to clear the way for His Highness?" Guo Zhan's spirit was refreshed, and he stared at the two of them and asked, "What does this mean? Why does His Majesty suddenly dote on the prince so much?" Kong Jiju and Zhao Qiuagong both glanced at Guo Zhenji. "Why else?" Of course, it was because Prince Gong had exposed himself. Now that he was detained in the palace, he had no chance to trouble His Royal Highness again. The voice of impeachment against the prince was instantly reduced by half. And the prince is going to be a father. In the past few months, the prince's temper has been decent, and his handling of things is still stable, and it seems that he has returned to the past. The emperor was not willing to abolish the prince. The prince was so absurd before. When he gave up on himself, he was under pressure and was unwilling to abolish the prince. Now that the prince has improved, he will naturally pave the way for the prince. Wang Ji was obviously chosen to be the chicken, and Zhou Man's book was chosen by the emperor as the introduction, so they were naturally knives. Kill the chicken to warn the monkey. If the monkey is not honest, there will be more disputes in the future. Kong Jiju sighed inwardly, but did not show it on his face. He handed the book to Guo Zhenji again. 2 days off. This book was selected by the province last night, and there must be not many people who know the news now, so you have 2 days to prepare. Guo Zhenji took it, and then he looked at the book again and considered where to start. Kong Jiju turned around and sat down on the chair, brought a cup of tea and said, "Actually, this book is very well written, although the allusions and literary style used are a little worse, but the scolding is slapped in the face, and the charges are listed for you. Come out, the corpse will eat a vegetarian meal, this is the taboo of an official." Guo Zhenji still doesn't quite understand. Anyone can write this book, how can Zhou Man write it himself? The princess is about to give birth. Isn't it bad for her to participate in these things at this time? Up to now, I thought it was Confucius Jiju and the emperor instructing Zhou Man to do this. Kong Jiju glanced at him, and simply pointed out, "Guozhan, this book was written by Zhou Man himself, and no one instructed her." Zhao Qiuagong had secretly had a drink with the emperor yesterday afternoon, and he was sure that the emperor had no intention of cleaning up Wang Ji and the others yesterday. He turned over the book in surprise and said with a smile, "It's not bad for a woman to have this insight." In the end, it was her subordinate, Kong Jiju said proudly. "She is sensible in her studies. She has been familiar with Confucian classics since she was a child. Although she is a woman, she was trained by a scholar, so naturally she is not bad." Guo Zhenji glanced at him. Although he didn't know Zhou Man very well, they were both on duty in the East Palace, and because the only female official was in their East Palace, those under him discussed Zhou Man a lot. He knew that, compared to Confucianism, Zhou Man was more religious. He heard that a servant in her East Palace was punished, and when she complained about her birth, she taught people to worship Tai's Hanglajun. Not to mention, her teacher is also serving as a lecturer in the East Palace. Although she has only met a few times and hasn't spoken much, Guo Zhan also knows about it. When it comes to governing the country, Zhuangsun is more respectful of Taoism and legalism. But this is not the time to fight for merit. Now that you understand what the emperor means, and you are facing your own position, it is natural to discuss what to do. After the discussion was over, Guo Zhenji still couldn't help avoiding Zhao Qiuagong and quietly asked Kong to sacrifice wine. Is this really His Majesty's original intention? If he wants to be somewhere else, what should I do? It is implied that if the emperor is interested in fishing and wants to fish out the prince's power, then the prince will not be able to escape the crime of forming a party for selfishness. As a matter of Donggongzhenji, Guo Zhenji had to consider the existence of this situation. When Kong Jiju heard the words, he lifted his eyelids and glanced at him, and said, "Master Guo has been thinking too much. Your Majesty wants to abolish the prince. The first 2 years were an opportunity. Why should it be unfavorable to the prince at this time? Not to mention how much the prince has in his hands. Man, will your Majesty not know? In the past few years, in order to fight with Prince Gong, the Crown Prince has exhausted all the cards in his hand, and even because he has no children and is uneasy, he has lost many ministers and subordinates. To say that Prince Gong and other princes have secret staff, Thuxin, but when it comes to the prince, he really doesn't believe it. If you're really worried, just let the people on the bright side do it, and keep the people in the dark." Kong Jiju couldn't help but ask, however, does the East Palace have people in the dark? Guo Zhenji. When Kong Jiju saw it, he snorted in his heart, and it seemed that there was no more. Guo Zhenji lowered his eyes. There are still some, but not in his hands, but in the hands of the prince. Even he doesn't know much about it. Although Kong Jiju has many dissatisfaction with the prince, he is still the teacher of the prince. If the prince is not good, he may not be how, but if the prince is good, he will be somewhat better. Moreover, among the dwarfs, there is a taller man. Although the crown prince is not good, as long as there is a possibility to change it, he is still much better than Prince Gong. Therefore, Kong Jiju also devoted himself to helping the prince run around. As a result, during the 2-day vacation, many officials were not able to spend it well, and everyone was locked in the study room to write essays on words and sentences. And Man Bao consciously handed in the document, and she had nothing to do with her for the time being, so he went out of the palace happily, and after eating a bowl of Shaozai noodles, he was invited by Zhao Qiuagong's mansion to see Miss Zhao. When she left Zhao's residence, Zhao Qiuagong happened to be coming back from outside. He stopped her, looked at her up and down for a long time, then smiled and patted her shoulder, saying, "Don't let your men down." Just after he finished speaking, he saw his youngest son Zhao Liaolang came back from outside with a horsewhip, and the servant behind him was still carrying a lot of things. Zhao Qiuagong's expression fell, and he said to Zhou Man again, "How can a man be compared to you? Man Bao looked at Zhao Qiuagong dumbfounded, and Zhao Liaolang, who felt that he was stared at for no reason, said. Next update around 11 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1708. There is always a grand meeting after taking a holiday, and this time is no exception. Early in the morning, after discussing some important matters, everyone began to hold their breath and wait. Many adults who already knew the news or sensed the wind did not move. Finally, an official from the Ministry of Household stood up, bowed and saluted, and said, "Your Majesty, I have something to say about the impeachment of the Crown Prince and the Imperial Physician's Office by the Imperial Physician's Office." The Emperor lifted his eyes and nodded, "Speak." The official of the Ministry of Household said, "The Imperial Physician's Office has set up private medical teaching, and it only earns 2,000 taels a year. I have seen the Imperial Physician's plan for this amount of money. I just buy some of the waste from the Imperial Physician's teaching, and it will be almost a year. It's this number, and it's not about making money." Wang Ji immediately stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the Imperial Physician's Office is just to learn medical skills. Even if it is a government school, the annual training is only about 8 taels, and even the best private schools outside dare not take more than 20 taels. Repair, and the Imperial Physician Office's District Medical Craftsman School dares to ask for 100 taels, you know, this is $100,000. The Emperor, who was drinking tea with his head down, almost sprayed the tea. It is quite a lot to replace it with copper plates." He didn't drink tea anymore, and when he saw that they were about to quarrel, he turned over the table, picked out Zhou Man's book that had been returned from the table, and threw it to Gu Zhong who was beside him. "It's a coincidence, today I received a note, which also mentioned this matter, but this note is for the impeachment of Wang Yiking." Gu Zhong read it to them. Gu Zhong bowed to take it, opened it, and glanced at it, then raised his head and said to the 100 officials below, "This is the book of Zhou Man's Hang compiled by Chongquen Museum." Then he began to read. Zhou Man was young in the end, and the excerpts he wrote were too lively, beginning with, "Your Majesty, I heard today that the Imperial Physician's Office has impeached the Prince and Xiao Yuan for charging 100 taels of silver beams from private school classes." When the minister heard about the right thing, he was deeply saddened and angry. "I'm sad that my Dajin and His Majesty have this minister, and I'm angry that my Dajin and His Majesty have this minister." Gu Zhonian paused here, and couldn't help but raise his head to explain to the ministers, "This is written on the book, not repeated by the lower ministers." The emperor propped his forehead with one hand, blocking the view below, and snickered secretly. Gu Zhong paused for a while and continued to read, "Your Majesty should know that the matter of the Imperial Physician Department was advocated by the minister and by Shan and by Cheng together. His Majesty Jizi has also passed down that the various official offices have taken turns to check, and the original intention of the establishment of the Imperial Physician Department was Dajin's. Tens of millions of people, not only the poor, but also the rich are blessed. The diseases in this world can only be cured by study, and the cultivation of doctors will not only be used by the poor, but also by the rich. But your Majesty and the Empress are kind and loving, and they understand the difficulties of the poor people in the world. That's why they emptied their private treasury and also built the Imperial Physician's Office to train doctors for free. The 3-year cost calculated by the East Palace and the Imperial Physician's Office alone is no less than $1 million. Not to mention that after 3 years, doctors will travel all over the world and start to pay for medical treatment for the people, and the cost here will only increase. But your Majesty and the Empress agreed to build the Imperial Physician Office even though they knew it was going to cost. Is it for their own benefit? Of course not, it is for the benefit of the common people, for the development of medicine and disease from generation to generation, and for the benefit of the entire future generations. Life. Zhou Man has always been nagging, and she can write about the elder with just a foreshadowing of the previous situation. When she finally finished blowing the rainbow fart of the emperor, The conversation turned to the private school class. She originally wanted to write about why this private school was established. Wasn't it a trick that we, the Imperial Physician's Office, came up with because of power and power? However, Bai Shan said that writing hatred like this has drawn too much. The main reason is that the Kui family, Wang family, Lu family, and even the princess's family, the queen's family, and the Kongji restaurant are all on the list. If Man Bao didn't want to be beaten by the group, he could only ignore this matter first. So she skipped it at this time, and didn't mention the fact that their imperial physician office was forced by the power. She only said, "The Niang loves all the heroes and thinks that the courtiers are working hard for the state, and you really have to be careful about your health, that's why we spend money." The price of 100 taels was also negotiated by Mrs. Zhao Qiagong and others in front of the queen. Master Wang, while impeaching our imperial physician's office for accumulating money, has applied to the imperial physician's office for a place. Gu Zhong glanced down, saw some words, thought about it, and continued to recite, "Does Mr. Wang think that our medical craftsmen are inferior to scholars? To learn medicine, we must first learn to read and write. Which doctor in this world is illiterate? And is there any scholar who can't understand a little medical theory? Don't forget, the ancestor of medicine is the Yellow Emperor. In terms of nobility, who can compare to him? Applying to the imperial physician's office is for personal gain. This impeachment, and the suppression of doctors, is not for national benefit, but for personal gain." Man Bao said, "The censor should monitor hundreds of officials and seek benefits for the people, but officials should put the people first and be loyal to the monarch, but you wait and think of self-interest. For this reason, you will not hesitate to make a mess of the court. Not only do you have to dig up the walls of the country and your majesty, but you also despise what the country and your majesty have given you. Not enough, it just doesn't make sense." She wrote, "How do you measure this year's healing? Let me tell you, I measure it by the value of a healer, and today I can't take less than 10% of the value of a healer. Do you know how many people they can save by putting them in the local medical office, and how many more people can they increase each year? And the value of people is immeasurable. You are proud of the scholar, thinking that the scholar can rule the country, but the doctor can rule the people, and the country is made up of people. What's more, I have done my duty as a doctor, but you can't be a scholar. As a taxi who is full of poetry and books, he only thinks about petty profits every day, for his own interests without caring for the interests of the country and his majesty, corpses and vegetarian meals." The rest of the words were even more unpleasant. It was a pile of all kinds of elegant cursing words. Gu Zhong quietly lifted his eyelids and glanced at Wang Ji, who was already so angry that his face was ashen. The 4-character idioms that curse people are all read out. I thought that this unfriendly book would start to quarrel as soon as I finished reading the courtroom, but who knew that Wang Ji, who was not too angry, was about to speak angrily when another person came out. "Your Majesty, this minister agrees with Zhou. After all the documents, the minister also has a letter to impeach Wang Ji, Liang Fei, and others." Immediately another person stood up and came out. "This minister also wants to impeach Wang Ji and Liang Fei's corpse, only for personal gain. The minister agrees." Chen wait for the second opinion in the hall. More than a dozen people knelt down and said in unison, "Please thoroughly investigate Wang Ji, Liang Fei, and others for the assessment." The hall was quiet for a while, and Wei Ji, who had been half closed, also opened his eyes and said, "Your Majesty, officials should avoid corpses and vegetarian meals." Wang Ji's eyes widened, and he immediately knelt down and said, "Your Majesty, this minister has been wronged, and Zhou Man is doing this for revenge. It won't be pure old saying, everyone will see it. It's not very well written, but I've revised it for a long time. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1709. The emperor looked down at him and asked, "Are Zhou Yiqing and Wang Yiqing at odds? Don't the two of them know about the difference between them and Quan Shiatang?" Zhou Man was impeached by Wang Ji shortly after he entered the palace gate. Later, Wang Ji beat his nephew and Zhou Man rescued him. Because of Wang Rong's incident, Wang Ji was not only separated from the family, but also had a bad reputation. It's a lot, and it's weird to be able to do it. However, this kind of thing that everyone knows is only understood in the heart, and never declared in the mouth. As soon as Wang Ji was asked, he immediately reacted that he had made a trick. His forehead was sweating, but he still insisted. Said, "Your Majesty, medical practitioners have always started as apprentices. When they were apprentices, they never heard that they needed to be trained. It can be seen that the training cost is not as high as Zhou Man said. She scolded me as a national scorpion, but the ministers did not dare to recognize them. It is true that the Imperial Physician's Office set up a private school class for His Majesty and the Empress to understand the ministers, but they were used by her and the Imperial Physician's Office for profit. She is the national scorpion." The official of the household department who was still standing said, "I have a list handed in by the Imperial Physician's Office here. It estimates the approximate annual loss and the approximate cost of 2,000 taels. It can be said that it is basically used for teaching." Wang Ji asked, "In other words, in the future, the expenses of the Imperial Physician Office will be borne by those who send people to private school classes? Then why does Zhou Man say that I am a national dragon?" As soon as these words came out, most people felt a little uncomfortable. Yes, will the expenses of the Imperial Physician Office need to be paid by people who send people to private school classes in the future? The household official said, "Master Wang thinks too much, the expenses of the Imperial Physician Office are more than that." "Then what are you talking about?" The Ministry of Household official choked, which made him say, "He is not an imperial doctor." Yang Heshu, who had been sitting silently at the back, stood up and said, "The medicinal materials and utensils used in the teaching of the Imperial Physician Office have been worn out a lot. This minister has seen Xiao Yuanzheng and all the imperial physicians make calculations. If your Majesty wants to know more, it is better to ask Xiao Yuanzheng he." Lord Zhou came to ask the court. Imperial physicians generally do not go to court because they do not participate in state affairs. However, Lord Tang lifted his eyelids and said, "Zhou Man is still a 5th grade editor, right? Why didn't she go to the Great Court? 6th rank Beijing officials must attend every court meeting." Everyone was silent for a while. The emperor looked at Guzhong, waved his hand and said, "Go to Xianxiao Yuanzheng and Lord Zhou." Guzhong responded, bowed, and retreated to give instructions. Only then did the personnel department react and explain, because Zhou Man was compiled by Chongguen Museum, and Chongguen Museum belongs to Zhan Shifu. So why didn't she go to the court and couldn't ask them about the official department? She had to ask the Zhan Shifu. Guozhenshi, can this pot still come to him? Zhou Man was specially recruited by the emperor and the prince for the prince's sake, saying that it was for the Chongguen Museum to repair books, but seeing that she ran to see the prince from time to time, she knew that her role was to ensure the safe birth of the prince's heir, and she was so young. Who would think of letting her go to court? However, the situation was favorable for them at this time. Guo Zhan did not want to stagger this topic, so he simply admitted his mistake. "This is the negligence of the minister, please forgive me." The emperor waved his hand and said, "Go to the official department to receive the punishment yourself. It's also simple to expose the matter." Wang Ji and the others wanted to say something, but Guo Zhan confessed his mistake so easily, they couldn't keep up, and they couldn't find a reasonable reason to change the subject, so naturally they continued with the previous question. Although he could tell the difference, those who impeached him still impeached him. Taking advantage of the absence of Xiao Yuanzheng and Zhou Man, more than a dozen ministers listed took the opportunity to state their impeachment papers. Their essays are very short and concise, and everyone's dry recitation is over in a while, and most of the meanings are still overlapping. If Xiao Yuan Zheng and Zhou Man hadn't arrived yet, the emperor would not want to listen anymore, mainly because he was sleepy. When the servants and guards from the Taiji Hall came over, Man Beijan was busy with a brush and a snack while repairing books and eating snacks. And Xiao Yuan was sitting quietly thinking about how to write a defense. He received an impeachment paper early this morning. According to the procedure, he would either plead guilty or write a defense. It is impossible to admit guilt, and the crime of accumulating money with the crown prince is not a light one, and he is not stupid. After deliberating for a long time, he picked up a pen and wrote a short paragraph, and the Taiji temple came to announce them. Your Majesty announced that Xiao Yuan is going to the Hajj with Lord Zhou. Man Bao didn't react for a while. She looked left and right, as if she was the only one surnamed Zhou in the entire Chongguan Hall, so she pointed at her nose and asked, "Me?" The maid bent down and said, "Yes, it's Lord Zhou, please, Lord Zhou." Man Bao immediately put down his snacks, clapped his hands and got up. Thinking about it, he felt a little bad, and took a sip of water from the teacup. Then he took out his handkerchief and wiped his mouth while asking, "Why do you want to announce me?" This question was straightforward enough, and Xiao Yuan Zheng, who had already stood up to go with the servant, also pricked up his ears. The maid said with a stern face, "Your Majesty wants to ask about the imperial physician's office." Man Bao stopped and asked, "What are you asking about?" Seeing the staring eyes of the servants and guards, Man Bao said confidently, "There are a lot of things in the imperial physician's office. I knew in advance and prepared the materials." At this moment, Man Bao finally remembered something, rolled his eyes and asked, "Did His Majesty, who I impeached Lord Wangji, see it?" The inner servant felt helpless. If he informed other officials, who would dare to ask so much? Shouldn't have quietly shoved him some money. It would have been nice to get a reminder from him. However, Zhou Man is different from others in the end. He has also been to the side hall of the East Palace to get acupuncture several times. The last time he caught a cold and had a cold, it was Zhou Tai who helped him to make some pills from the Taiyuan hospital. Otherwise, the taste of the decoction is too great to be concealed. Just when Xiao Yuan was hesitating whether to put a purse for the inner servant, the inner servant said directly, "Your Majesty Jizi read it in court, and Lord Wang defended it in court. Imperial Dr. Zhou should go quickly." Man Bao still didn't understand, and asked curiously, "How did Mr. Wang argue?" She admits that her essays are already very good. How can there be any arguments? And why is he arguing in court? Shouldn't he be arguing with her, and then debate with her in a space? The inner servant was standing not far from Gu Zhong at the time, and naturally he listened to the audience. He glanced back at the guards, and seeing that the other party only urged them to hurry up, but did not stop him, he said, "Master Wang said that the future of the imperial physician's office will be the expenses depend on 2,000 taels per year, so how can we say that they are national scorpions?" When Man Bao heard this, his eyes widened, and he directly said to Xiao Yuan, "He is really thick-skinned. Imperial physician Lu, where are the booklets and lists that we received earlier? Bring them out to me quickly." Xiao Yuan Zheng was also angry, and immediately said, "Quickly find out." Imperial physician Lu, Imperial physician Zheng and others immediately helped to search in the table and cabinets, and soon they found the booklets and lists in Yuhui. Man Bao took some, and gave the rest to Xiao Yuan Zheng. The two of them went to the Taiji Hall with high spirits. On the way there, Xiao Yuan Zheng and Zhou Man said, "You are clever, and you will scold him back for me later." Next update around 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1710. It was the first time for Man Bao to go to court when he was so old, and it was not the first time for Xiao Yuan Zheng. Although imperial physicians could not participate in politics, sometimes when the emperor fell ill and the imperial court was not stable, as a imperial hospital, he wanted to go to the imperial court. Answer the words of the ministers within Chen's heart. However, this was the second time for him to have such a large court meeting. The first time was when the emperor ascended the throne. At that time, regardless of whether he was an imperial physician or not, he had to stand below to greet him. Man Bao originally walked with her head held high, and when she arrived at the entrance of the main hall, she saw Xiao Yuan was bowing her head slightly. She thought for a while, and then walked in with her head lowered. The two of them held things in their arms, and after entering the hall, they put the things at their feet before bowing to the emperor. The emperor waved his hand, dismissed their salute, and asked, "Zhou Man, do you impeach Wang Ji, Liang Fei and others for a corpse meal?" Man Bao immediately replied yes. The emperor pointed to Wang Ji who was not far away from her and said, "But Wang Ji has defended, so answer him." Wang Ji's question is not difficult to answer. She and Dr. Lu have consulted on medical skills, and she has also practiced with Dr. Ji and Taifan. Later, she has learned a lot from Dr. Ding and shopkeeper Zheng. Up to now, she still can learn from the imperial physicians in the imperial hospital. She knew all too well how difficult it was to study medicine alone. The reason why she went so smoothly is because she has Keek, and behind Keek is the encyclopedia and Teacher Mo. Teacher Mo taught her a lot of things, and the books in the encyclopedia can be bought as long as you have points. It is only by relying on those books, the things that Teacher Mo taught her, and the various prescriptions she found for her, she can get other doctors there in exchange for medical skills. So she was not walking the path that ordinary doctors would take. But that doesn't mean she doesn't know how difficult it is for an ordinary doctor to learn. The most typical is the grandfather of her fifth sister-in-law, Dr. Lu. He has been a medicine boy for nearly 20 years before he can learn a few recipes and some basic medical principles from his master, and it took him 7 or 8 years to accumulate some. Only after returning to the village did he become a doctor by himself. Most of the medicines he used were collected in the mountains by himself, and then concocted by himself. The fifth sister-in-law told Man Bao that when she was a child, her grandfather was very careful when concocting medicinal materials, because the medicinal materials were not well prepared and the toxicity would not go away. But no matter how careful he is, he can also cure bad people. Basically, the old Dr. Lu can only treat a few diseases. For more serious diseases, he can only send people to the county town. When the doctor in the county town prescribes a prescription, next time he will prescribe the medicine according to the prescription, or increase or decrease it. In the past, Man Bao thought that Dr. Lu was very powerful, but after seeing the prescriptions prescribed by Dr. Ji, Dr. Ding, and others, she knew that there are actually many ways to treat a disease, and the prescription can be prescribed better. Old Dr. Lu is like this. Zheng Xiao is a side branch of the Zheng family, and the situation is not much better. He is average in talent and all depends on hard work, but that's it. He can only be a medicine boy by her side when he is 16 or 17. According to the rules, he has to be a medicine boy by his side for at least 10 years, and she will watch and pick out some prescriptions and diseases to teach him. At that time, it is up to him to decide whether to stand on his own or continue to stay in the Jes Etang. But no matter which one it is, with his talent, it is impossible to be very powerful, because no doctor is willing to waste too much time on him. Besides him, there will be more talented people, as well as their own children and nephews who need to be cultivated. Why do they have to work so hard for an ordinary medicine boy? Wang Ji used ordinary apprentices to compare the students of the imperial physician's office, which was inherently arrogant. Anyway, everyone was standing up in the courtroom. She had the breakfast made by her sister-in-law in the morning, and she ate a lot of snacks just now. So Man Bao went from Dr. Lu to Zheng Xiao, taking the two of them as examples to tell the emperor and ministers how much time it takes for apprentices to learn and what they can learn. She said, "People live for only a few decades, how long can a person live?" From the Ministry of Household's perspective, it is only 52 years, but they need about 30 years to study, but they can't get much. It's just superficial medical knowledge. Dare to ask Mr. Wang, is there anything in this world that is more valuable than time? However, in the teaching of the Imperial Physician's Office, students begin to teach Meiju, Materia Medica, Mingtang and Suwen as soon as they enter school. Crude medicines and materials are also provided by our Imperial Physician Department. They don't have to please the master or master, and they can learn the knowledge that ordinary apprentices need 10 years or even 15 years to come into contact with without careful observation. Some people can't even learn things in their entire lives. Or is it because you have a lot of land? Or is it because you are so proud of the book that you dare not throw away even during a war in troubled times? Xiao Yuanzhang felt that something was wrong. He coughed lightly twice, but Man Bao was so absorbed that he didn't pay attention to him, so he didn't pay attention, and said directly, "If Lord Wang is still unsure, think about how the children of the noble family are like. Reading, how the underprivileged children read, and how the commoners read, then I understand how valuable the knowledge taught by the Imperial Physician Office is." Everyone understood in an instant. The Imperial Physician's Office was equivalent to the Imperial Academy, and whether the people it accepted were children of noble families, children of poor families or son people who knew nothing, they all taught in the same way the skill was taught to them. Moreover, looking at the admissions of the Imperial Physician's Office, most of the students recruited were poor families and prostitutes. Many of them had never been exposed to medicine before, and some of them didn't even know the words. If this really happened among the gentry, the officials would naturally not allow it, but this is in the Zinglan world. In the eyes of the doctors, these people are afraid of being a poor family, so they let go of the restrictions, which is beneficial it was them. Wang Ji wasn't stupid, of course he understood. Zhou Man was telling him that the most valuable thing in the Imperial Physician's Office were the Imperial Physicians who taught, and the knowledge in their minds. But if he understands it, it doesn't mean that he wants to deal with Zhou Man, so he won't lose. Has he admitted that he was a vegetarian? So he said with a stern face, "I participated in the Imperial Physician's Office to collect money. Medicine is rare. Can your Imperial Physician's Office set a high price for the accumulation of wealth?" Man Bao glanced at him, dug out a book from the materials on the ground and said, "Okay, since you want to discuss the cost, then I will have a good discussion with you. See you at 9.